Welcome back to another episode of the Bonsai Stuff podcast. I'm Scott Martin from Bonsai Matsu. You should already know that by now. Thank you very much for listening in, and it is so good to be back home. Back after 8 weeks on the road, out visiting and working with lots of other bonsai people and just sharing the bonsai love around Australia. It's been fantastic, but it's so nice to be back with my own trees. Everyone knows that when you've been away for a little while, a couple of things you miss. Miss your own bed, miss your animals, but you miss your bonsai as well. That's me. I'm loving it at the moment because there's so much to be done as well. I did have some help while I was away to try and maintain things, just keep an eye on things, which is fantastic. It's brilliant, greatly appreciated. Also done a hell of a lot of work before I went away. All those systems that I've talked about, the watering system and camera system and all that sort of stuff, just worked an absolute bloody treat. So it's quite a relief to know that all went really well. And now I'm just catching up on things. I've still got a lot of work to be done in regard to candle cutting on my single flush pines. So part of the focus for this podcast is going to be talking about candle cutting as opposed to decandling, something which I get asked about all the time. And it's nothing new in the world of bonsai, but it does need to be explained. So I thought I'd take this format to talk about that. Also want to talk about some other things that came up across the travels onto the other side of the country, which again is really common. It's the same old question that we all go through: is when does it become about quality and not quantity of our bonsai? Sends a shiver up most people's spine when they look around their yard and think there's no space for one more tree and this backyard's going to explode. I know, trust me, I've been there. I had to actually buy a new house just so I could fit the trees in. It's a nice excuse to buy a bigger yard, I suppose. And also want to talk about a bit of maintenance I've been doing around the yard at the moment, a few things I've seen in my collection. So let's get into it. Okay, so candle cutting and decandling. Two very different things. One, I use, and this is only me, other people do different things, you may do different things, and that's cool. I just want to explain the process that I go through when I'm working on my different pine varieties that I work with. I love my pines, I really do. I think that they're classic. I love all different types of, or variety of trees, but the pines have a really special place for me, always have, always will. And I break them into, let's call it 3 categories. No, let's do 4 categories. So there's the single flush pines, like your Scots pines, your Mugos. Then you've got your dual flush, which I put in the category of black pines, red pines. There's a multi-flush, which is a bit of a grey area, but where they can shoot out at multiple times throughout the growing season, and I put radiatas into that category. And the 4th one, I'm going to give them an own category, all of their own, is Japanese white pines. So when I talk about candle cutting or decandling, please ignore Japanese white pines. I don't recommend doing either of these things with a Japanese white pine. It can have really disastrous results. So I'm not going to talk about them today, but don't do what I'm talking about today on the podcast with your white pines. So I'll focus on decandling first because I'm not going to talk about that very much. Decandling is the complete removal of the spring candle. So everything that's grown from a little bud that grows up a little green stem and puts out new needles on your Japanese black pines and Japanese red pines, everything that's grown on those pines, you completely remove. So scissors go in, push down to the very base of that spring candle, no, not leaving a little bit of a stub, nothing, cutting it, removing it, being done with it. That then activates a ring of dormant buds around the base of where that candle was growing, and it starts or recommences the spring growing period, for want of a bit of an analogy, I suppose. So when you decandle, you're forcing dormant buds at the base to activate and grow. Then they grow, they push out, and then autumn, winter next year, we go through and we clean them back to only 2, we needle pluck and all the rest of it. So decandling is relatively mechanical. on the proviso, and this applies to all this candle cutting, any work you do on your pines, any work you do on your trees, full stop, is the prior health assessment of your trees. So if they're strong enough to do it and you've determined, yep, this tree looks great, I'm going to go through and I'm going to candle cut or decandle, whatever it is you're going to do for the particular variety, then you've decided to do it. That's all a given that we've done that before I proceed with this task. So decandling, complete removal of spring growth to activate dormant buds at the base of the candle, which we then sort out and clean out and needle pluck and whatever else in autumn, winter. Okay, decandling, that's it, done, forget about it. Candle cutting. Candle cutting is very different. Now, candle cutting is a technique that I use where I will cut into the new spring candle, leaving the green stem plus a few pairs of new needles and then removing the tip of the growth. Okay, so it's not, if you cut and just leave green stem with no new needles, then it's not going to live, it's not going to grow, it's not going to do what we want it to do. Leave the green stem. Sometimes that stem may or may not be there. Like I've worked on a lot of radiatas lately, and most times that green stem isn't there. Same as on Scots pines. That green stem's not there. It just starts the new growth. You can see the new growth because it'll go from a brown colour with older needles to a new green stem with brighter, more vibrant needles. So candle cutting is coming in to that new spring growth, leaving a few pairs of needles, and then cutting. The number of needles you leave, that varies. But what we're doing by candle cutting is we're activating backbudding in that new candle. All right, so what you'll find is more often than not, and it's, when I say roll of a dice, it's a calculated risk that I take. The stronger and more healthy the tree is, the better the chances. But where you make the cut from into that new spring candle is the point at which the new buds will grow. So let's say, I'm just using a measurement. Let's say your candle has grown 10 centimetres. If you cut it and leave 9 centimetres of new growth there, so you're just really taking the tip off it, then the internode where the new buds will grow is going to be 9 centimetres away from where it should be. So my approach with it is, based on the health and volume of needles that I've left on the tree and all that sort of thing, I'll try and minimise the length of the cut into the new spring candle so my internode gets shorter. So if it's a 10 centimetre candle that's grown, a spring candle that's grown, I will look to leave, no more than 1 centimetre of new growth and new needles, because it's from that point where I make the cut that the bud grows, and that's my new internode. So when you do this stuff, right, you've got to go through that stage of development assessment. What stage am I? Am I trunking Nabari? If you're trunking Nabari, forget this podcast. This is not for you. If you're working down the ramification end, stage 4, then definitely this is something that you'll need to be doing, because your growth is going to keep getting longer and longer. When you have a pine grow, that one little bud continues into one long candle. So it's a 1-to-1 relationship. What we want is a 1-to-2 or 1-to-many relationship. By candle cutting, you're forcing this new candle to backbud, which means that we then get multiple shoots coming from that area. So we go from 1-to-1 relationship to 1-to-many, which then autumn, winter next year, again, just like with decandling, we can go through and we can clean it back to the 2 buds. So candle cutting is something which is done, it's hitting a reset button, right? So you've had this growth come along, it's pushed out, and you're hitting a reset button by coming into the new candle, cutting and making sure that you leave some new needles there. Not too long, not too short, but just right. Just enough needles on there to make sure that your internode for the next stage of the bonsai's progression is correct, right? So I guarantee if you leave really long spring candles and just cut the tips out, you'll get to the point where you're looking and go, it's just too long, I'm going to have to remove it. So you're better off pushing it back a little bit harder than what you're comfortable with, so the tree develops nicely. If you cut it and there's no new needles, I'll just reiterate, if you cut it and there's no new needles, then it's not going to work. All right, you need to make sure you leave some of those new needles. If you leave just the green stem with no new needles, then you're effectively decandling, and that may work, but it may not. And that's why I don't decandle my single flush pines, because it's a hit or miss, whereas candle cutting, for me, has produced great results. You look at any of I've just recently posted on Instagram some of the trees that I've done. And if you look at the density of the Scots pines, then they're just magnificent. They thrive on this sort of thing. But it's something that's based upon the health of the tree. And if you do it when the tree's weakened and you're applying a pretty serious task to these trees and expecting them to bounce back strongly, it's not going to happen. All of my trees have been really well fed up to this point, so I know how they're going to respond because I've done it for so many years with them. So radiators, I do the same thing, even though I called them a multi-flush pine because they can keep pushing out. I do this candle cutting with them as well. Find it's really safe, works really well. But, and here's the but, the timing of this thing. So what we're doing is you've had spring come around, you've had these little buds that have grown last year start to grow, and they push out, they've got new needles, the tree's looking really great, really vibrant, really bushy, really shaggy. It's all right, well, how do you work out the timing of doing the candle cutting? All right, what's the timing of hitting that reset? And this is unfortunately where it's going to vary for a lot of people listening to the podcast based on where you are in your growing season. For me, it took a lot of years to work out the timing of my candle cutting, because you do it too late, you don't leave enough time in the growing season for new buds to form, and those new buds may grow this year depending on the variety, or they may just set for next spring. Ideally for me, like with my Scots pines, I want those buds to set now or in the next couple of months, and then grow when spring comes around. That's my ultimate aim, is to have buds available for me for next year. I don't want a second flush of growth like we get with black pines. I want buds to set so next year my growth's really close and tight and dense. Plus my trees look really nice after having been candle cut and needle plucking. But I'll get back to the needle plucking side of things in just a sec. So the timing of it, if you do it too early, then you might find with varieties like the radiata, the Monterey pine, that you're giving them too long in their growing season, which means that we're doing this because we want a relationship on the tree it's structured to become more ramified, right? So 1 to 2 as opposed to 1 to 1. You'll get that if you candle cut early. But we also want to try and get shorter needles and shorter internodes, and that's why we pick a point in time and we cut them to reduce the growing period remaining for that tree. All right, that's the really important part. We're not just doing this because it's a job that we can do. We're doing it because we want to achieve something, have our bonsais take a step forward. So by candle cutting around a certain time, leaving only a certain amount of time left for your bonsai to produce buds and potentially grow again, keeping the internodes quite short and keeping the needles nice, that's the perfect time. So I found with radiata pines, which I've done a hell of a lot of work on, if I do it too early, internode length shoots out and the needles are massive. So I'm achieving one of my objectives, which is the division of 1 into 2, but I'm not achieving anything else. If I did it too late, then I'd find that I'd put the tree under a lot of stress because we're getting right into the heat of summer as well, but I'm also forcing the tree to grow as rapidly as it can before it goes into dormancy, and I ended up with a hell of a lot of juvenile growth. So it was like a pendulum. Same as when it came to decandling time for me. I had to try and work out the timing of that. Too early, you end up with massive internodes, massive needles. Too late, maybe the tree didn't push as many buds as what it should, or the needles it grew were way too short for the tree and really weakened the black pines. So you have to work out these things, and that's where if you talk to someone that's done this stuff, if you reach out and seek advice, then you might find that your climate's very different, or very similar, or very different to me, or you might find it's very similar to someone local to you that you know and you trust in your bonsai network, that does this sort of stuff, and they might go, yeah, cool, I know Scott said to do it, early November, but for us, we do it now, or we do it at that time because these are the results you get. And then at least you've got a closer ballpark for what you do. And I rely heavily on other people in groups when I do presentations or I talk. Maybe I'm away from home. I never walk in and profess to say this is what you should do and this is when you should do it. I can say from my experience, this is what I've experienced, and from having talked to XYZ, who is a fantastic grower of these things, they said that the timing would be this. And I think that sharing of that knowledge, that's the best thing we can do with each other. That's, if all of our bonsai all around the world get better, well, how good's that going to be? You don't keep this stuff to yourself. And if you do something and it doesn't work, you share that information as well. I've found the ideal time for me to do candle cutting is around about the end of October through to mid-November. That's the ideal time. If I could pick a date, then I would say, I don't know, let's say the 5th to the 10th of November would be my ideal window for doing it. And it's been very consistent for me. The results have been really, really good. But that's in my climate. Where I get super concerned is as the climate's changing, as we get more intense weather, a lot more highs, a lot more lows, stronger winds, higher temperatures, colder temperatures that come like flicking a switch. That concerns me because I'm certain that this timing that we work with anywhere around the world, it's going to have to vary. And if we don't roll with the punches with our trees and maybe interpret what they're doing and when they're doing it, some years we might get caught by surprise where, let's say for instance you're always decandling on 10th of December, whatever it is. You might find one year they grow exceptionally well and you're inundated with growth. The next year you do it on the 10th of December and you're like, hang on, that's they've hardly done anything. Nothing's changed. I've still fed them the same way. I've still, repotted the ones that need to be repotted. And I'm just consistently not getting the same results across my entire collection. And it's happened. I've had it said to me, I've had it happen to me. So that's where these dates for everything that I do in my yard, they're a general indication. It's not something I set a calendar date on. If I look at the growth and I think, it's probably not as strong as what it could be, maybe just let it go for a little bit longer. Wait a little bit longer for the candle cutting process. If it looks super strong, super early, well, it's like, geez, do you go early or do I go a little bit later? Because if it's super strong, what am I going to do? But anyway, it's that health assessment of the tree that should get done first and foremost. All right, so to wrap up, hopefully that's clear as mud. No, hopefully that helps with the candle cutting process versus decandling. Very different. Hopefully it helps with the timing that I use and the reasons why I do it. The other thing that I do when I'm doing any work on my pines at any time of the year, and then for me there's mainly 2 times a year that I work on my pines. So don't do too much with them because you'll kill them. It's the candle cutting / decandling time for them, and then there's the autumn winter styling and needle plucking and wiring and shaping and making them beautiful, all that sort of stuff. So in between there, they're just allowed to do whatever they do. They're fed well, they're given lots of sunshine, they're given lots of water, and they grow beautifully. I love them. They're just an easy tree to look after. Once you know the routine, the system for for pines, they become very easy. Overworking them is going to be your big downside. Anyway, so one thing that I always do when I am working on my pines and / any tree in the collection is to balance the tree's strength. All right, so balancing a pine comes through needlework. So if there's been a lot of needles grow in the apex of the tree, or maybe it was a bit too heavy with needles prior to this candle cutting, then sure, I'll remove some needles. But if I've done my job properly in autumn, winter, when I've done the needle plucking, there's not going to be any new needles growing in the old areas. So really, I don't need to do any needle plucking across the tree if I've done my work properly in autumn winter. If you haven't, then yep, sure, you can needle pluck and remove excess needles, especially in the stronger areas. When you go through and you candle cut, you're cutting off a lot of the foliage mass. So I wouldn't be going through doing any needle plucking until you've done the candle cutting process. Then once I've done that, I'll look at the trees, and the main needles that I'll remove after that are the ones that are underneath the pads. The ones that are growing down that have sort of rounded off a little bit and make the tree look a little bit flat and not as sharp as what I'd like. That's where I do my needle plucking. So if you look at the photos on social media, you'll see that before the needles look like they're a bit rounded. After they're all plucked and they look sharp, look nice, pads look defined, everything's back on track again. That's really what I'm doing with my pines at the moment with candle cutting in a nutshell. Hopefully it helps. And like I said, keep the white pines completely out of the situation. They are completely different and require a completely different approach. If you go through and do any of this work, decandling or candle cutting on a white pine, then I will not be held responsible because I guarantee it's not going to end well. So they're another species entirely. But candle cutting, it's a great technique. It's something which will help you develop at the ramification stage of your tree's development, and it's absolutely essential as far as I'm concerned in regard to maintaining and developing high-end trees, especially radiatas, where for a lot of years they've been a bit of a mystery. I found this candle cutting works really well, and doing it like I said now affords me really nice, solid, straight needles. I'm not worried about shortening needles on a radiata. I'll just build the tree around the needle size that it naturally has. Some are smaller, some are longer, but it gives me nice straight needles, and I don't have to worry about that constant influx of juvenile growth. Juvenile growth just isn't a thing. So use it as you see fit, and I'm sure you'll love to have it in your kit bag. Right, so around the yard, having been away for a period and getting back to the trees, seeing that they're all great, I looked after I activated a long-term systemic insecticide, which actually lasted just for 8 weeks, which is perfect. So there's no nibbled leaves, there's no destruction, which is really nice. But that product has worn off after 8 weeks, as per the label, which is awesome. So I've been walking around the trees lately, doing my inspections, giving them all a big cuddle, and just been enjoying spending time with them. And one thing that I've noticed is a hell of a lot of small little moths or butterflies around the yard. And all in all, that's not normally a problem. But, how I test for that is as I'm watering, I'll water obviously the base of the tree, and then I'll flick some water up into the foliage, and I'll have a look at the tree and see what it does. It's a nice little technique, especially on some of the bigger trees that you can't always get into. And anyway, so on almost, I'd say 50-60% of the trees I have in my yard, these little moths or butterflies would fly out. Little yellow-looking things they are. And they were everywhere, right across the whole yard. So all in all, I'm not too fussed about a few of these things flying around. In fact, they look quite nice. What I'm worried about is them laying eggs on my trees, and what hatches from those eggs that becomes extremely destructive. And they seem to do a hell of a lot of damage when it comes to the pines, as the caterpillars will start to grow, and then they'll start to form their little nests, and they'll pull all the needles in there and tuck them in nice and close, and I find that they'll eat through the base of the needles, and the needles all die. So if I'm not on top of my yard maintenance, my bonsai care, then these things can rapidly get out of hand. And based on the sheer number that I've seen, I'm going to have to step up my game to make sure that I'm on top of this as a preventative rather than being reactionary when I start seeing damaged leaves. Once your foliage is damaged, there's not much you can do about it until next year. So I have been taking very active measures around my yard to make sure that I am looking after things from a fungal point of view, as per the podcast on fungal issues around the yard, but also from an insect point of view. It's just one of those times where I find in Melbourne we're getting humidity. It's gone from warm yesterday to pouring with rain today to stinking hot coming up in a few days to freezing cold the next day. Nothing new there, but with that sort of environment, it harbours a lot of bugs and a lot of fungal issues. So it's just something that you need to be on guard for. So if you're walking around your yard this time of year, as we head very late in spring, just prior to summer, which I can't wait for, then you need to make sure that you're keeping a close eye on your trees, and whatever measures you're going to take, whether they be chemical, natural, or they be beneficial insects to help you around the yard, I'd strongly suggest that you be on the front foot, that you make sure that you're taking action exactly as you plan to, just so it doesn't catch you by surprise. Because, to be honest, this is these little butterflies that I've seen are possibly the most that I've seen. And I don't know whether it's because I've been away for a period and they've been able to come in a lot more than what they normally would have. But anyway, it's something that I'm definitely on top of and taking steps now to prevent any future or further damage happening to any of my beautiful bonsai. Anyway, all right. So now to wrap up the podcast, I want to talk about when does it become about quality and not quantity? I've talked about this before, but it's just a refreshing conversation to have. And refreshing, I mean, no judgment, zero judgment, especially from me. If you've got too many bonsai, then that's me silently clapping in the background, because been there, done that, and love them. You know, I find it very hard to walk away from nice trees, which is part of the reason that I don't visit a lot of bonsai nurseries in the flesh anymore, because it's so hard to bypass that tree that you look at and think, that'd be really nice. But then I think back to my yard, think back to how full my benches are, think back to all the work that I have to do, and more often than not, the variety that I look at that takes my fancy is something that I may have plenty of already. So the last thing I need is to be inundated with something else to increase my stress levels. But there does get to be a point, definitely there is a point where you will go from quantity to quality. And it happens generally around about the third or fourth year. That's my experience. So if you're in year 1 or 2, love it, enjoy it. Keep taking your cuttings, keep visiting nurseries, keep buying stock, keep ensuring that your collection is growing at a rapid rate. Because I'm positive that when you look through your collection in a couple of years' time, when it starts to be about quality and not quantity, some of that stuff that you're acquiring later in your bonsai journey, as opposed to what you started with, will be a lot better bonsai in the future. That's generally how it works. Your bonsai eyes developed over time, and you'll be acquiring some really nice bloody stock. The trouble with your collection is going to be the stuff that you acquired early, that you went to these big green hardware stores and saw them sitting on the bench and thought it was a bargain and snatched them up and went, how good's this? This thing was only $4.50 and it's going to be the best bonsai in the world. Maybe it will. But more often than not, from my experience and what I've seen, those ones are the ones that you learn a lot from, you get a lot out of, you get to develop your skill set with, but sooner or later you'll look at them and go, it's just not going to cut it. I just need to make sure that my collection's getting better now, and this stuff that I started with needs to pass on. So around the 3 to 4 year mark, why it happens around that, let's say 3 to 5 year mark, by then what's happened is stuff that you started with, every year, the basic premise is that the work doubles on your bonsai, give or take, right? Every branch should divide into 2 branches or thereabouts every year. That's growth. That's how trees grow. So it means that when you've got the first year and you're cutting a certain number of branches, it's easy. No worries. You can fly through it, a couple of seconds. Barely even warrants bringing it into the workshop or to your garage to work on it. You walk out there in a couple of cuts and you're done. It's boring. Like, where's the rest of them? So you're going to acquire more trees, more and more and more. The thing is that every year that work compounds. It doubles. And you're going from a couple of minutes to suddenly it's half an hour per tree. And half an hour suddenly turns into 45, 50 minutes per tree, and you're looking at a collection that's grown so rapidly that's still continuing to grow because you can't say no to a bargain. You can't say no to going to a sale day. And you're suddenly inundated with all this work where that work suddenly starts to interfere with your personal time, with your you time, with your family time, with whatever you want to do with your time other than working on your bonsai. Then going away suddenly gets a hell of a lot harder because that little watering system that you used to have, or the neighbours coming over sprinkling a bit of water on your trees every day or 2 days because you only had a few of them, suddenly blows out to hours and hours, and it's not a task that you can rely on someone else to do properly. What was a menial task for someone suddenly becomes half a day's watering every single day of the holiday. It's too much. It's not going to work, and that's when you turn around and you'll say to yourself, or you will have said to yourself, I've got to start getting rid of some of this stock. I've got to start turning it over. I've got to get rid of some stuff and focus more on the quality trees rather than the quantity of trees I have. And you'll make a decision to stop taking cuttings. You'll work on a beautiful Shimpaku juniper and you'll cut it and you'll make it look nice, and you'll look down at the floor and see all those beautiful branches that have been cut off. And rather than getting out the rooting hormone powder, you'll suddenly go, nah, they're going in the green bin. That's when it becomes about quality, not quantity. Don't feel bad about it. It happens to every single one of us. And then what happens is you become far more selective. When you start going to bonsai shows and you walk through the sales selection, it's got to be a special tree that makes it onto your bench. You'll still be acquiring stuff in those early stages. You'll still be building your collection, and you'll say to yourself, okay, one out, one in. That's the way this is going to go from now on. As soon as I bring on a new tree, I've got to get rid of one of these, or it might be 2 out, 1 in, depending on the nature. You'll start getting a bit more money for your trees as you're selling them or moving them on because you've put all these years of work into them, and they're not just a stick in a pot anymore. They're a starter stock. And where I want you to rest easy, or to be confident and comfortable with your decisions that you're making about moving on some of your trees that maybe aren't at the standard that you want them to be, for someone else, they're going to be the best tree in their collection. So they're going to go to a good home. Don't fret, don't stress, but know that it's a highly natural, organic thing that happens to every single person in bonsai. Every single person in bonsai that I've ever come across, that's ever done a workshop with me, that's ever done a class, always tells the same story. And as you get further and further along with your bonsai journey and you hear these stories get told, you'll laugh. It happens all the time where everyone laughs and goes, I've been there, done that, and I'm still trying to get rid of some trees. I've still got too many trees, but I'm certainly getting better and better with my collection. Where you get rid of the trees, where you move them on to, that's up to you. I love the club sale days. I think they're an awesome environment to be able to sell trees and move them on to fellow bonsai enthusiasts, because it draws in a lot of new people, a lot of people that are fresh, that have got that, that glint in their eye that you used to have when you'd walk into these things and just be snatching trees left, right and centre. They're the place that I'd strongly suggest. So, join up with your local club, get involved with their sale days and make that the spot that you move them on. You can also use, the online forums and stuff like that, but they may be a bit hit or miss, but your local clubs, that's the way to go for me. I tell you, it's good to be back in the studio recording the podcast. I did love travelling. I do love meeting new people. I do love seeing new places and new trees and new varieties, especially of Australian natives. Seeing some of those, I'm so excited too. I've got a few native species which were given to me as gifts while I was away, which are going to become very important Bonsai Matsu trees. So if you're listening and you passed on some of your local natives, thank you very much, because they mean a lot to me. At the moment, I can tell you they are sitting just outside my workshop. I'm trying to work out plans for them and just taking my time, just really enjoying being involved with a different variety of Australian native that I've worked with before, but to have something in my collection to plan and develop long-term strategies for, that's really bloody exciting. So even though the last section of the podcast talked about, not increasing your collection or maybe reducing it, an old dog like me that has got way too many trees still gets that excitement when something new comes into my yard, I can guarantee you. So looking forward to it. So they'll be something which I get to sink my teeth into over a period of time in the future. Absolutely zero rush, so I'm really looking forward to it. Thanks for listening in. I hope the candle cutting explanation helped with my focus and what I do, and hopefully it's a technique that you can use around this time of the year too. It's still not too late as far as I'm concerned to be doing it. In fact, I'm still actively working through my collection at the moment doing exactly that. When I hit stop record on this podcast, I've got a nice little radiata sitting in my workshop. It's the first thing I'm going to get into once I wrap this podcast up. So thanks for listening in. Thank you to the subscribers. You mean the world to me. There's been a few new ones come on board, and I really love it. It really means a hell of a lot to me. So thank you very much. Keep loving your trees. Spend the time with them. Make sure like I said, this is a community service announcement for any bonsai lover out there. Just have a look at them for bugs and pests and stuff like that at the moment, because they can take hold pretty quickly, and try and sort them out before they become a problem. That's the key that I use, is that preventative stuff, or being one step ahead of the competition is not a bad thing. Thanks for listening in. Love you all. Love your trees. Love my trees. Love being back. Thanks for listening in. Until next time, happy bonsai.